Big tech platforms like Etsy, eBay, and Amazon are taking advantage of small businesses, and there are no resources available to help them. The Indie Sellers Guild has been working to bring visibility to these issues, which we'll go over today, as well as what we need from you to help us move forward with change. The Indie Sellers Guild is an international grassroots nonprofit fighting for a better, fairer internet where makers, artists, designers, and other creative indie sellers can run sustainable online businesses. This summer, Etsy's reserve payment policy devastated thousands of small businesses. We work to help affected sellers by starting a petition, contacting journalists, creating tools for them to understand the math of how the reserve was applied, and sharing their stories. We heard from dozens of UK sellers whose businesses were devastated by Etsy's increased use of this policy. I want to use this recent situation as a case study because the reasons why it was so devastating come up again and again when talking about the ways big tech platforms can affect the income of the small businesses that make a living through them. Let me set the scene. Imagine you run a small handmade business on Etsy. You wake up one day, you check your email or log into your Etsy shop dashboard and see this notification. There was no warning, but now 75% of your revenue from each sale will be held for up to 45 days. This immediately creates a huge cash flow issue for you and your business, which now has to keep functioning on a quarter of the money you should be earning. The stated reserve of 75% is bad enough and way above industry standard, but the way it was calculated meant Etsy sellers actually receive way less than the remaining 25%. In this one example, the seller received just 8% of their money. Now, small business owners needed to draw from their own money to process orders, all while no longer receiving any money to live on. That's the position thousands of Etsy sellers found themselves in this summer. Many reached out to Etsy support to try and resolve the issue, which cost them hours spent in live chat or emailing back and forth, only to finally be told Etsy support could not remove the reserve, could not tell them the specific reason the reserve was placed, or what they needed to do to get it removed. There was no appeal and no other point of contact. So, sellers sought help outside of Etsy, but quickly found there was no one to turn to. Etsy is an overseas company in the UK, which means they can get away with not following many UK laws. This American company ends up essentially above accountability to the elected government of the UK. Therefore, no department has remit over these kinds of issues. In the US, the relationship is considered business to business, so consumer protection laws don't apply to these small businesses. This is despite the huge power imbalance between a small business, often of just the owner, and an international corporation worth billions. This is not a business-to-business relationship where both sides can fairly negotiate the terms of a contract, but one in which a huge giant dictates the rules for millions of others. Legal action ends up being prohibitively expensive, even when there is a case, for small businesses, as Etsy's forced arbitration clause prevents sellers from filing a class action lawsuit.
At midnight, with no warning at all, we were placed into the Etsy reserve, which meant that 75% of our earnings were being held by Etsy. And as you stated in your presentation, the reality of it was that we weren't getting that remaining amount. We were actually sort of seeing 7 to 8% of our income actually being released to us. We could sell a chopping board, for example, and have 65 pence released to us. Which, when you sort of think about the fact that you have to buy materials, packaging, you have to ship it, it just wasn't sufficient for us. The average amount that we would have held at any one time was sort of between £6,000 and £7,000. It put us in a position where we had to do something that we've been really careful not to do before. We had to obtain credit from our suppliers, which meant that the knock-on effect of Etsy's actions was it reverberated. We were getting pretty desperate. We were sort of thinking this is it. We're going to have to shut this down. We had no explanation of why we were in the reserve, which meant we had no explanation of how we could get out of the reserve. Our experience was the same as everybody else's. If you reach out to Etsy, they would say to you, here's a generic list of 5 reasons that you might be in the reserve. None of them were applicable to us, so we couldn't resolve it. We reached out to Citizens Advice. We tried to get through to Trading Standards. We couldn't. It was under nobody's remit. And the frustration for me, I consider myself, I've got my law degree. I'm quite savvy. And so when I didn't know where to turn to, how's anyone going to know where to turn to? We were at one point about 2 weeks away from shutting down. So we would have had, so my husband and I both work in the business. It would have wiped out our household income.
The characteristics of the Etsy Reserve policy and the problems it caused for small businesses are emblematic of how these issues play out across big tech platforms. Again and again, we see these same factors. Small businesses receive minimal to no warning of changes in the policies or platform features that will affect their income. Though often only hundreds or thousands of pounds, the amount of money affected is a large percentage of the revenue for the small business. The support from the platform does not help or cannot provide useful information. There is no appeals process. There's no one else to help. There's no government agency with remit to turn to, and legal action is prohibitively expensive. Finally, there's no safety net for these small businesses. They live at the whim of these platforms with no security, constantly having to adjust to whatever profit-seeking policy is handed down. But why should you care? Is this really affecting that many people? How many UK citizens are earning a living from their Etsy small business? In 2021, Etsy published a census report on its sellers, including by country. That year, there were 960,000 active Etsy sellers in the UK. That means almost 1 million people had an Etsy shop set up and at least one transaction or fee that year. Since then, the number of Etsy sellers has increased by 23%. So it's safe to say over 1 million people in the UK have Etsy shops by 2023. For 34% of those sellers, their creative business is their sole income. That's over 300,000 people. And these small businesses don't just support the sellers, they contribute to the greater UK economy. And that is just Etsy, which is one of many platforms and not even in the top 10 e-commerce sites in the UK. According to a report in 2021, internet shopping is more popular in the UK than in any other country. E-commerce accounted for 30% of the retail market in 2021, a 50% increase from 2020. That year, e-commerce annual revenue totaled over £90 billion, or $120 billion. All this goes to show a significant and growing number of UK workers and small business owners earn their income through an e-commerce platform that connects them to customers. Platforms like Etsy, Amazon, eBay, and even Airbnb and Uber act as gatekeeping platforms between the small businesses creating the value on one side and the consumers who want to patronize those businesses on the other. They don't make anything, they don't sell anything, and they offer services no one is really happy with, yet have managed to lock down their markets to the point that these small businesses cannot afford to leave. They are the troll under the bridge, extorting a higher and higher toll just across, having burned down all the other bridges. If marketplace platforms like Etsy or eBay were a physical landlord, they would be the mall your small business has a brick and mortar shop in. And being in the mall versus your own storefront somewhere else obviously has advantages. But in this mall, the landlord sees all the data from every sale and conversation you've had in your shop, can change the terms of your lease at any time, holds your customer contact information so you cannot reach them outside the mall, can close your shop and kick you out of the mall at any time, advertises for other stores in the mall in your own shop, keeps you from selling items you sold in the mall at other locations at a different price, and can reach into your cash register and take money anytime they want. and it's the only mall for your kind of business.
Then eventually Etsy had suspended that shop, and I reached out to them and they said, just get in touch with the lady that put the trademark. And I reached out to her and she was so understanding, and she actually withdrew the trademark, and Etsy acknowledged the trademark being like withdrew, but they said that because, yes, they acknowledged the trademark has been withdrawn, but they're not going to reopen my shop. And if I got back in touch with them, they just wouldn't respond. Bearing in mind, I've been with this company for over 10 years. I had 6 shops with them. Every shop had 5-star reviews, and would build 2 companies up on the back of Etsy. In the scene, even though I had a problem with this one shop, they then see me as a bad seller, even though the problem had been rectified. I'd had 10 years with them. They closed down my US shops completely, which resulted in we're losing the US visa, because to have the business visa, we had to employ 2 Americans. And then they realized that I was also the director of the company in the UK, and that even though I was a different company, because I was the director of the company in the UK, I was literally closed down. So yeah, they closed me down literally overnight without even a conversation with the human.
This is not just Etsy. We receive stories every month from sellers having their income affected or money stolen by big tech platforms, and they have no one to turn to, so they reach out to us. 2 recent examples include Amazon's attempt to delay payments to sellers for 2 weeks that affected UK small businesses. Then Amazon turned around and offered sellers loans at interest to cover the cash flow issues they created. PayPal currently has a class action lawsuit against it for taking money out of businesses' accounts for alleged violations of terms. We've heard stories of platforms suspending someone's account with money still in it, canceling a customer's order with no explanation, issuing a refund to a buyer without contacting the seller and against the seller's policies. We've already been collecting and sharing stories about small businesses affected by Etsy's reserve payment policy. We intend to expand that work to any small businesses or workers who have had their income affected by these gatekeeper platforms. Since people already know about the Guild and we have connections with other e-commerce based small business groups, we are well positioned to start gathering this information for them. We can speak for sellers and workers, but we need someone to speak to. We need a point of contact who knows what to do with the information we gather, who can raise awareness of these issues with lawmakers and regulatory agencies. Our short-term goal is to have a governmental office dedicated to receiving the stories and complaints of small businesses and workers on these platforms, and with the power to investigate the issues further. Our long-term goal is a regulatory body specifically for e-commerce, and the information we gather will help ensure that any changes truly improve conditions for those who need it the most. This is an issue even people outside of the affected small businesses understand. Big tech stealing money from the little guy. If we can break through here, if we can do anything to hold big tech accountable for messing with the money of those who make a living through their platforms, those changes will be able to help solve other problems. We will have reduced their power, which currently gives them strength beyond that of entire governments. This is a chance to fight back against Goliath, and there are millions of Davids out there just waiting for someone to hand them a rock. Thank you so much for listening.